everybody for coming out, and most especially thanks to Councilman Voigts and especially Stephanie for opening their home to us today. I very much appreciate it. And if you are Lake Forest citizens, you're very well represented by Scott. And make sure that you take this opportunity to ask him your questions and hear from him about what's going on in this wonderful community. I am privileged to represent Lake Forest up in the State Assembly. And so let me kind of give you a little bit of talk about what's going on right now up in Sacramento, and then basically open it up with some questions. The biggest topic of conversation up in Sacramento, no surprise to anyone, is going to be the state budget, where we are, where we're going, and when we're going to get there. The biggest issue with respect to the budget also is the question of, will the governor get these tax increases, tax extensions, call them what you will, onto the ballot or not? The Republicans are opposing it, and some legitimate questions can be asked of the Republicans. The legitimate question is, why do you oppose it? What's wrong with the governor's budget proposal? So let me take a few minutes to explain my position and my caucus's position as to what are the problems we see with the governor's budget and what are some of the solutions, some of the alternatives that we're proposing. And I've got a few numbers to throw out, not too many, fairly easy and straightforward to follow. But I wrote an article that appeared in the Flash Report earlier this week. I've got a copy of it up here that also lays out these numbers. So if you want to take a copy, you're welcome to, and it'll explain it maybe in a little bit more detail. But in a nutshell, here is the problem. We had, for an 18-month period, the last half of the current fiscal year and the next 12 months of the 2011-2012 fiscal year, a budget deficit projected to be about $25, $26 billion. The question facing Governor Brown and all of us up in the legislature is, how do you close that gap? What the governor has proposed, and what I'm sure you've all heard in the papers, is a balanced approach. Cuts to spending, tax revenue increases or extensions that are balanced, and a budget that's no gimmicks, no business as usual, no Schwarzenegger accounting tricks, solves the problem. That's what we were promised. What we ended up getting was a budget proposal of about $12.5 billion in spending cuts. $12.5 billion in taxes. That's a balanced approach to solving a $25 billion problem. Republicans, why aren't you on board? All right, let's dig into the numbers here. And these aren't mine. I'm not a CPA. Russell could run these numbers better than I could. This is what the fiscal department of the nonpartisan legislative analyst's office says. Of the governor's $12.5 billion in cuts, it's really only about $8.5 billion. Why is that? $2 billion of the cuts aren't cuts. What he's going to do is, instead of spending it from the general fund, he's going to spend $2 billion from a special fund that is arguably related to the spending. It's still state spending. It's not a cut. So it's not 12.5, it's 10.5. And then there's another $2 billion that relates to Prop 98 funding. Prop 98 is supposed to be backfilled of about $2 billion. They budgeted for the backfill of $2 billion. They're going to pull the $2 billion out, not do the backfill, and call that a cut. So immediately that $12.5 billion cut, according to the legislative analyst's office, goes down to $8.5 billion. That's all the cutting the governor proposed. That's not balanced with $12.5 billion in tax increases. There's a problem on the tax side too. The most obvious one is that the governor wanted 5 years of tax increases. Why? I'll tell you why in a minute. But immediately, even if his numbers are balanced, 12.5 in cuts, 12.5 in taxes, it's an out-of-balance proposal 5-to-1. 1 year of cuts, it's 5 years of tax increases. The legislative analyst's office, not the Republican fiscal office, not me, says it's not $12.5 billion, it's really about $14 billion. So that's $70 billion in taxes over 5 years versus $8.5 billion in cuts in 1 year. Wildly out of balance, no matter what the governor says, and in part reliant upon some of the same old accounting tricks that we'd seen before. Then it gets worse. Why 5 years? If you look at the governor's plan, there's $8.5 million in cuts one year. The next year, spending's the same. Years 3, 4, and 5, state spending increases 31%. He needs $70 billion in taxes to pay for that 31% run-up in spending. That's a Schwarzenegger budget. That's business as usual. So you have the promise of balanced approach, the promise of no gimmicks, the promise of a budget that solves our problems, stops doing what we've been doing wrong. And none of those things were in the governor's budget. So we said no. We are not going to buy into business as usual. We've got to take a stand here, we've got to take a stand now, and we've got to fix the problem. That's why we've opposed what the governor's trying to do. We haven't just opposed it, though. How many of you heard the governor, or read the governor say, I can't work with the Republicans. They won't give me any ideas. They're just saying no. I see some nods. That's what all the press was reporting. February, I think it was 17th. 26 Republicans in the Assembly, the governor and his entourage, sat in a room in Sacramento, pretty much spread out like this. I myself said to the governor, Governor, in my district, unemployment is 10%. Statewide, it's 12.5%. In the Central Valley, it's 30 or 40%. Do you know what the rate of reduction of state workers is? He said, no. He turned to his director of finance, Ana Santos. Very competent, she's good. I wish the governor had let her do her job. She said 1%, Governor. And I said, Governor, lay off 10%. I don't want you to match the unemployment, the private unemployment rate. Just match it in my district. How about you reduce the state workforce 10%? He said, we couldn't possibly do that. Another one of my colleagues asked for a spending cap. Another one of my colleagues asked for some pension reform. Another one of my colleagues, and we kicked out a bunch of ideas. I've gone through a few of them in the article. You know, if you move, again, I haven't done the numbers, but if you move the start date, the cutoff for kindergartners from September, I think it's September 1 to December 1, there's $1 billion savings right there. Do you know, I was told this, it just absolutely boggles my mind. If you are in prison and you need a medication, I am told the state will not let you use generics. You must use the name brand.
You gotta be kidding.
All of the drugs are at a central warehouse. The prison sends in a requisition for the drug goes to the prison, and apparently this happens fairly regularly. The prisoners move. The prescription can't follow the prisoner. It needs to be thrown away, and another piece of paper goes to the central depository to get the generic. Chancellor Drake of UCI sat in my office. He said, Don, you can save $500 million there a year. I mean, that's the cut he's proposing to the UC system. You can save $500 million a year. In that alone, you haven't compromised a single person's health care. You give them generics that the rest of the public takes willingly. There are savings there. The governor said no. He said no to a spending cap. He said no to pension reform. He said no to reducing the workforce. He said no to the whole gamut of ideas that were put out. Then he went out to the press and he said, I can't even get the Republicans to give me ideas. Yeah, he's getting up there in years, but he didn't forget. So perhaps some of my frustration shows through. We had high hopes of being able to work with him. And what we are finding, I am truly, honestly sad to say, is that he isn't doing what he said. He isn't giving us the budget that is the kind of budget that we can agree to. He isn't receptive to ideas. It's his way, and that's it. No compromise, nothing. If the governor had said, all right, I don't need 5 years of taxes. He needs just 18 months to get over this problem. He'd have had bipartisan support. I don't know that I'd have agreed because I want to see other things. He would have gotten the deal. But he won't do the deal. There were a group of senators, there were 5 of them, that were busy negotiating with him. And man, they went on for a month. And the governor kept saying, they're not giving me any ideas. Well, finally, out of frustration, they put out a list. It's like a 7-page long list that counts like 53 different items on this list that went to the press. That's what they had been talking about. That's what we talked about in February when we met with the governor. None of those ideas were new. None of those ideas hadn't been floated before. None of them was engraved in stone. They were ideas to talk about, closing the budget gap, to talk about bipartisan solutions to the budget problem. Basically, we called the governor's bluff. Till the day before, he'd been saying, they won't give me any ideas. Now he said, well, they're giving me too many ideas. All these ideas, they keep changing. So we are extraordinarily frustrated right now with the governor and the governor's proposal, and have objected to the proposal as floated by the governor. And frankly, his unwillingness to compromise. As I say, bring it down from 5 years to 18 months, you probably get Republican votes. Put other things on the ballot, Governor. Put tax reductions on the ballot. Put a hard spending cap on the ballot with your tax increases. Put a couple of other things on the ballot. Governor won't do it. He's afraid they may pass. So it's not as if the Republicans, frankly, have been saying no to everything. It's that the governor's been saying no to any compromise. His plan, only his plan, and at least now you know. I mean, you don't have to agree with me, but that is why we oppose the governor's plan.